Welcome everybody to Zeta Global Radio. Happy Saturday. I am Rainey Savante, your host today and every week. And hope you had a very good Earth Day last week. We celebrated 4 incredible musicians who are, as we said and you heard, exhibiting planetary mindfulness and really stepping up and getting really clear on where they are in their lives and what it means to give back through their talents and through their music and what they've learned along the way. And it set the perfect stage for this week's show, which I'm very excited to share with all of you. I'm here off the coast of Southwest Florida, and I am zooming in with Andrew McKenzie all the way in Estonia. And for some of you, you know who Andrew McKenzie is. For some of you, you're going to learn who Andrew McKenzie is as well as I am. So this is a great journey we're all on here today. I'm realizing that it's Monday morning that we're recording this, and a Monday morning, I feel like it should have been like Saturday night at 2 a.m. with some, but at least I got some candles and incense going. But I'm getting into the mood of being able to chat with you, Andrew. So let's welcome you to the show. Andrew McKenzie, founder of the Hafler Trio, and about many, many other things that we're going to talk about in this next hour. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me, and
Yeah.
So,
as I was telling you off air, this is a very unscripted show. It's really, doesn't matter who's on the show. It doesn't matter if someone's brand new, they've never done radio, or someone like Deepak Chopra who was on, and they say he's Time Magazine's one of the top 100 icons of the century. I don't take any of that in. I just kind of go with where we're at and what we're supposed to share. And it's wonderful that you're here. I'm going to learn a lot about you. Howard, my husband, who's producer of this show, speaks so highly of you and said you are very revered in the music industry, and he seems to know a lot about the right people, and I'm just excited to know about you. And for you to share here, totally unscripted, right? We have no time limit. We're not FCC regulated where we can cuss or not cuss. We just get to be us. So I'm going to let you take the floor and share a little bit maybe on the background, and we'll kind of bring things up to where we are. For the fact is that you are also a contributor on Music to the Earth, and we'll get to that at some point in this hour on why you felt called to that.
Well, where would you like me to begin? I mean, this is
well, let's start with the Hafler Trio. Most people know you from that, and what the Hafler Trio was, and is there or will be, or just give us the journey of that. We'll start there.
Well, like a lot of people in my generation, I first got interested in doing all of these sort of crazy things when the punk thing came along in England in 76, 77. And what was most interesting to me was what happened just after that. And that was when there was a sort of a coming together of things like, you could mention things like literature, film, all sorts of other things, what we would now call multimedia.
Yeah.
That word didn't exist then, but just the idea that if you did music, you could actually refer to all of these other things. Now, some people had done that, but it was very few and far between. There was a sort of an aura that you had to be pure about your art in those days, and you couldn't mix these things together. And to me, that was the most exciting thing. So we're talking around about 1978. However, in my very early teens, I'd actually been a classical guitar teacher, so I'd actually learned some of the rules, let's say, before I went off and broke them all. I never really went to school. I left school when I was about 14. I used to go to the library and read all the books that nobody else wanted to read.
Like what? Give me an example.
Oh, I mean, there was a long bookshelf labeled miscellaneous, and obviously in this little
the others.
the stuff we have no idea what to do with. So there would be Yoga Sutras next to Nietzsche, next to a book about paper folding, next to a book about, and so on and so forth. And actually, that sort of set a pattern for the rest of my life where I never really saw the boundaries between these things, and that actually there could be a cross-pollination between anything and anything. I mean, it's worth remembering that when I was going to school, when I was at 11 or 12, there was still, biology and chemistry were considered to be separate disciplines. It wasn't until the sort of late 60s that they actually started talking to each other, which seems ludicrous to us now, because how on earth would you know about biology if you don't know about chemistry? But actually, they were very, very separate.
Did you feel prior to that you were out of the norm or out of the box or felt different than the rest of the group? Or did you?
Well, I had a head start with that. Because my father was a policeman, and everybody at school hates a policeman's son, because my father was locking up their fathers during the night. So I was also this tall, which is 6'2.5". I was that tall when I was 12 years old, so that sort of set me apart. Then also the sort of the environment that I come from was very much against culture in any form whatsoever. I mean, it's the very northeast of England, almost in Scotland, and anyone who was interested in art, music, anything like that was basically gay. And if you were gay where I came from, you got beaten up an enormous amount. So the very fact that I was interested in these things was, that just threw me out of the boat completely. So I would read all of these, some of them very esoteric books, more or less at random. And I didn't understand half of it, of course. I mean, I was 12, 13, 14 years old. But it made me familiar with some territories that later, when I came back in contact with them, then obviously I had some sort of grounding.
Yeah, access them.
So after all the punk stuff and this multimedia sort of stuff happened, almost at the same time, I mean, I had a couple of sort of punk groups, and then a rather strange group, which was just me basically talking into a microphone and a guy playing very strange guitar with some very strange backing tapes. Now, today, again, that doesn't sound so strange, but in those days, people would actually, even in Newcastle, where I grew up, people were actually throwing full pints of beer at us, which is quite a compliment. I mean, that's quite something. We supported The Clash and a few other people like that. And one of those gigs was with Cabaret Voltaire and The Fall. And so I struck up a friendship with Cabaret Voltaire, like-minded. There was no internet at that point, so anybody that you met that had any kind of interest in these sort of rather strange areas, you grabbed onto them for dear life and held on for dear life. Later, when Chris Watson, who's now known as one of the preeminent sound recordists in the world, he left Cabaret Voltaire and he came to work as a sound recordist at Tyne Tees Television in Newcastle. And I met up with him and we started just fiddling around with things. And it grew into what later became the Hafler trio. So that's the sort of historical background, potted historical background. But we were all...
How did it go once you become the Hafler trio? I mean, was it years? Did you pop immediately, or suddenly somebody took interest in you and it blew up? Like, how did it evolve? Well, you see, he wasn't interested in making records. He'd had a very unpleasant experience at the end of Cabaret Voltaire, and he wanted nothing more to do with the world of the record business, and I don't blame him. But after a while, there was at that time, pirate radio was quite big in London, highly illegal and all the rest of it, but people actually listened to it, and there were some interesting things going on. And Richard Kirk from Cabaret Voltaire had already done a program for a man who ran a cassette magazine as well as a pirate radio show. And Richard said, oh, you should do one as well. And so eventually Chris said, oh, well, it's not really a record. Let's actually do a radio broadcast. That's a bit more interesting. And so we did. So we had to come up with a name. And we had to, all these things that we've been fiddling around with, we put it together. So that's really how it happened. And then Cabaret Voltaire had their own record label, and they said, well, why don't we release it? And begrudgingly, it actually came out. But there was never really any intention to be a kind of group to play concerts, to do that. I mean, the first things we did were lectures. It had nothing to do with that. Weren't really interested in the whole idea of music. Other people did that. And
that was, fine for them, but it wasn't particularly interested. We were interested in more in taking things much further with cut-ups of tape, psychoacoustic experiments, frequencies, the effect that sound has on the mind, body, spirit, etc., etc., etc. So, although there were other people they were sort of playing with it. There were other people doing this kind of stuff, but they were sort of playing with it and referring to it as a kind of a little bit of a sort of seasoning or a little spice to what they were doing. And they would flirt with things like, using tapes from soundtracks to porno and stuff like this, just to inject a little frisson into the whole thing.
A little Flavor Flav.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very strange time because, of course, as I say, there was this sort of coming out of the whole punk thing, which then led to this sort of post-industrial, and then we got all this sort of then it all sort of started to coalesce. But we were never really interested in that because it was just another form of rock and roll to me. So
yeah, very cool.
So we were always, right from the very beginning, we had other concerns rather than just making records to make money or to make ourselves known. I mean, nobody really knew who we were. When actually finally started doing sort of public performances, people had absolutely no idea what I or anybody else looked like. I actually had people come up to me and ask me where the Hafler Trio were, because it wasn't about that, and it never was about that. And as far as I'm concerned, music is never about that. So,
well, I was just going to say the same thing. I've interviewed many people and worked for many people, and very well-known A-listers, and many of them said that that's not what they set out to do. They were just living their purpose, sharing their, doing what spoke to them, and then evolved into wherever, and notoriety and large fan base. But it wasn't like they set out to be like, I'm going to be a superstar. Like you said, you were just doing what you're doing.
Right. I mean, I was fiddling around with this sort of stuff when I had 2 broken tape recorders, and I could sort of pass things backwards and forwards and chop it up. And I thought I was the only person in the world doing this kind of stuff. And of course, found out later there was a lot of people doing this, but all in their bedrooms or their front rooms or whatever, with no thought that anybody else would want to listen to it or would have any kind of interest at all in it. So it was never really to do with that, but I think it's just this whole synthesis that came about, especially around that time. And you have to also remember that it was impossible to get information about all of this kind of stuff. I mean, if you heard about something through some reference that somebody made, you could go to the library and order that book, and it would take 3 weeks to get to you. You'd have 3 days to read it, and then somebody else would have to read it. So it made you actually much more conscious and much more attentive to what it was that you were actually getting. Today, of course, you can have any information you wish within a couple of seconds. Texts and stuff that has been forbidden or has been restricted or, secret or only given in, special circumstances. Of course, it's all available. If maybe it takes you 20 minutes to get it instead of 2 minutes in the hardest cases, but nothing is inaccessible. However, people value it less, and they don't read it in the same way, and in the same way as people don't listen in the same way as they used to.
Sure.
And this is one of the big things, because if you wish to get some sort of message across, people have to be listening, and you've got to play a whole different set of tricks in a way to actually some people need to be seduced, some people need to be fooled, some people need to be coerced, there's a whole range of things, because otherwise it will not happen, not in the way. Now, I'm not saying it's a better or a worse situation today, but it's very different. And this is why I don't make records anymore, because I don't think people actually listen with the same kind of attention as they used to.
You know what? We're going to take a quick break. That's actually a good stopping point, because you don't make records anymore, and we're going to talk about what you do. So everybody take a breather. We're going to enjoy our wonderful sponsors. Thank you to Cindertone Records for presenting this wonderful chat with Andrew. You're listening to Zeta Global Radio. We'll be back in a moment.
Are you ready to delve deeper to find the truth of who you are and discover your own unique gifts for the world? Have you searched for an understanding of your creative expression and how to bring that into form? World-renowned spiritual practitioners Teresina and Martin Bacons invite you to 2 special upcoming enlightened retreats. May 17th through 19th, join Teresina with co-presenter Cheryl Ryder for the powerful retreat Healing with the 5 Elements, held at the Sevilleta Federal Wildlife Refuge between Belen and Socorro, New Mexico. On June 8th through 10th, Teresina and Martin Bacons will be back teaching the sacred spiral of the phenomenal people, now reserving on the beautiful tropical paradise of Pine Island in southwest Florida. You'll join others to celebrate the sacred understanding of self, remember the ancient wisdom encoded in your body, and the opportunity to explore the creatrix within. You will emerge with the experience of an even more inspired, empowered you. Early registration and pricing is available for both retreats, and for more information, please visit beaconsoflove.com. That's beaconsoflove.com. Hi, Lainey Savante here, and I'd love for you to visit my new Facebook page for my private tarot and oracle session readings called Intuitive Wisdom. That's IN2 UITIVE Wisdom. Conscious strategies for manifesting a more harmonious life. Don't we all want to have that? Let's see what's in the cards for you as we look at what needs to be cleared, expanded upon, and evolved. There's a lot to explore when we take a deeper look inside ourselves.
Welcome back to Zeta Global Radio. Thank you so much for being here. Lainey Savante with Andrew McKenzie. And I'm not going to say of the Hafler trio, because that's just one part of his essence, one part of his experience. And we're going to talk about all facets. You know, I realize that not all of us go to work at a job for 30 years and then retire. We evolve immensely, and we have lots of hats we wear, and we try them all on, and some stick, and some you kind of cast them off to the wind and move on to the next thing, because we're continually evolving, as most of us here who are listening probably can respect that. So you have a lot of hats that you've worn, and now we're going to move into another one. Let's talk about Simply Superior.
Okay, well, the whole Simply Superior thing, because it's not that easy to define, came as a sort of a response to what we were just talking about, this whole situation where attention is in short supply, shall we say, or quality attention is in short supply. There's a lot of surface attention around, but in-depth. You see, I mean, you know, I can compare it to the situation when I was a teenager and I could afford to buy one record every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks or something. And for those 2 or 3 weeks, I would be, thinking about what record it was I was going to buy, because I could only afford to buy one. And it would be a Saturday morning. It was always a Saturday morning, and it was always the same record shop. And there would be the record that I thought about and did odd jobs and saved up for this record. And there, of course, would be another one next to it, which I hadn't thought of, or had just come out, which I didn't know about, or whatever. And that's where you learn about choice and decisions and all this other stuff. But
this is like ceremony. I mean, this is like a ceremony, a ritual to do this, like you're saying.
Well, of course, yes. I mean, it elevates the whole experience to another level. It's not just going and buying something. There's an enormous amount behind it. And then you take this record home, and then every square millimeter of this cover would be burned into your brain. If there were words on the record, you would memorize them, listen to nothing else but this record constantly for about 2 weeks until it's time to buy the next one. And the level of knowledge, the deep penetration into that world, which is what they were to me anyway, they were worlds I was being allowed access to. I just don't see that happening now. That kind of level of attention and concentration, which to me, what's interesting is that sort of level of concentration equals that which the performer or the producer of that record actually put into it. So you're meeting it halfway. You're not just being vampiric and sitting there and wanting people to amaze you. This very passive kind of consumption.
That's the perfect word, passive, because it feels like you don't see as much immersion and where you're jumping into the journey.
Right. Yes, indeed. So what I thought was, okay, is there a way to do that in a contemporary situation? And I'd been dealing with people with hypnotherapy and psychotherapy for some time, and I realized that actually that kind of deep effect, the way that I could best do that was a more sort of one-on-one situation, rather than trying to sort of make an object which would then affect people in that deep way, because people were, on the whole, there are still people obviously, but on the whole, people are not doing this. So I thought, okay, well, let's apply an intelligent way to do this, and we'll just take it all as being part of it. In the same way as I never saw any of these distances or barriers or separations between different areas, like when I was reading all those books in the library from one end of the bookshelf, the miscellaneous bookshelf, to the other. I thought, okay, let's do this with all of the influences, with all of the background, to make a synthesis which would actually be effective. It wouldn't just be mind entertainment. It would actually have the possibility to have a quality effect. Now, I wasn't never under the illusion that I was going to be able to do this on a mass scale, ever. If it was just one person, that would be fine. Because a quality action is not bound by the same laws as a quantitative action. It spreads out in a very different way. It goes much further, with much less, because it's not subject to the same kind of laws. So the whole idea of doing this was to actually, with all the influences, with all of the background, etc. I've been involved in many philosophical and traditions, let's say, quite intensively for about 35 years or something. And I thought, okay, well, let's take this, and instead of just having these being dead, let's have some kind of life where there is some life to be brought into the situation. And it's a little bit trial and error, like everything else is. So. This is the beginning of the idea, was to sort of remove this mass production and to make individual objects. That's coming to an end now, but that was what I was doing. So I would actually get to know the person who was buying it, and then I would actually make it specially for them. And every book was handwritten. That'd be like 120 pages, all handwritten. There would only be one DVD. It would all be made, and I wouldn't even keep a copy of it, etc., etc. That was reasonably successful for a short while.
Wow.
But
did people lined up for that, or they just
not so much? Not so much. You see, one of the things about all of this is it doesn't neatly fit in to any of the little boxes that people have, and this is the major problem with trying to sell this to anybody. Is that to try and explain this is actually quite difficult, and you give me half an hour in a room with someone and I can pretty much get it over to them. But trying to do it through a website or a book or whatever is pretty much doomed to a semi-failure anyway.
And you probably didn't have Skype or Zoom back when you were doing this, right? Or you did? Or was it internet?
No, it was, well, again, I mean, I have, this is a very big subject, but I mean, I have big reservations about the whole electronic communication thing anyway. So it has its utility. I mean, it has a particular function, but to do very in-depth things, I think it's a very dangerous area, and I don't think anyone who's being truly responsible about communication would rely on it entirely. So there has to be a kind of personal one-to-one thing, which eventually has to go on, which has now grown to the idea that I actually do this. I do online counseling with people, a sort of version of, it's not psychotherapy, or it's not a therapy, but it's the workshops that I do are based on the things that I've learned or stolen or assimilated through my particular development. And at this particular stage of life, I decided, well, it's time to give it back to people. So,
are your students artists, or are there anybody who are looking?
Anyone. We've had the oldest person was 72 years old and the youngest was 12 or 13. And actually, to be honest with you, the people who get the most out of it are the people who are not artists and not musicians, because what has also changed since the days that I first became interested in this other stuff is that musicians and artists have become the most conservative people that you would wish to meet. So they all know exactly how everything is supposed to be. They have so many preconceptions. They have so many prejudices that actually you have to spend 3 days in a 5-day workshop. You spend 3 days divesting them of those preconceptions before they're empty enough to be able to receive what it is I have to give. So, but someone who works in an office doing accounting doesn't have those preconceptions. So
I have to just say that you said that they're the most conservative, and I don't know if this has relevance, but I know in some of the interviews I did last week and others I've many musicians who are in death metal, punk, industrial, they're all, they're all doing very nice ambient music now. Like they're really just kind of like moving in this all beautiful, and they're just taking, we all go through, we mature in season in our own way. So, and it's all good. But that's why I was like, well, things are a little bit more conservative because, they've refined some of those emotions.
What was the last thing you said? Sorry.
They refined some of those emotions that you have with the angst as you're younger, when you're still trying to get it all out.
Yes, but it's a little bit. You see, I'm not using conservative in the pejorative sense.
Yeah.
So what I actually mean to try and clarify that. Is that there's a lack of flexibility. That kind of conservatism. Now, I'm not talking. This is not political at all. I'm talking about people who are. I mean, the worst people, and this is the strangest thing, is jazz musicians. Jazz musicians who used to be in the 30s and 40s were the groundbreaking, dangerous, on the edge people. I've talked to some people who are professional musicians. They said you just can't play with jazz musicians because they actually, if you go even slightly out of the whole idea of jazz, which is now being solidified into this clearly identifiable thing. I mean, we're not talking about the different notes. I mean, that's not written down as you've got to stick to these scales. And no, that's not. But there's a certain style, there's a certain attitude. If you step outside that, it just cannot work with it.
Yeah, now I understand what you're saying. And absolutely, I experienced that as well, meeting people. Very fastidious.
So what I was, as I say, I was never really particularly interested in. What I was interested in was the stuff that went along with music, the whole idea of that music would actually speak to higher levels. And, the idea that art never used to have a signature on it. You look at h3o Cathedral, then there's no signature on that. The whole thing was actually constructed to express higher concepts, higher values, higher thoughts, and to direct the people who came into that towards those thoughts. Music used to be, each note was related to a planet or the stars. It wasn't about personal expression. It wasn't about that. And it's only relatively recently that music or art is actually supposed to be about personal expression. Music was supposed to follow certain lineages and lines, and you went along with those traditions, and you could experiment within that. But the idea of you were doing this for even somebody like Bach or somebody like that, it was for the glory of God. It wasn't, to make Bach into a big, important name. God came first, and, I am God's humble servant. And you have this in Islam, you have this in Buddhism, you have this the whole idea that it's not about you. Tibetan tankas, for example, if you go to a Tibetan tanka painter and you say, I want a painting of Manjushri, or you want of Avalokitesvara or something like this. He doesn't do his own version. He goes back and looks in the past and sees, well, how did people do it before? And he copies that because that's how it's supposed to be. So,
I've seen some of those, in Kathmandu, you go into, if you've ever been there, just really seeing their divine expression of how they bring it all in. It's just absolutely
right. Yeah. And that transformative quality it's Cage, John Cage came up with the metaphor is that you like a radio. So you don't want, if you buy a radio, the more you hear the radio, the worse the radio is. You want to hear the signal which is coming through it. The more color and distortion that's put onto the signal, the worse the radio is. And so it's not really of any interest. Now, there is a place for all of this other stuff. It's just I'm simply not interested in it. So where I cross over is into the areas where music can transcend that aspect of personality.
The Remedy is Albuquerque, New Mexico's premier urban day spa. Created with you in mind, The Remedy offers a spa experience that goes beyond the highest quality treatments and products. They're there to help you relax, regroup, rejuvenate, and escape a bit from your busy life. You'll feel it the second you walk in their doors. They have a distinct menu of Ayurvedic services and therapies to infuse a sense of peace and well-being while allowing you to enjoy a luxurious feel and experience. Ayurvedic lifestyle consultations are available and suggested treatments that include Shirodhara, Marma work, therapeutic massage, Ayurvedic oils, detoxification, and nourishment of the body. For more information, please visit theremedydayspa.com today. Sandy Wyndham is Florida's premier artistic photographer. Her passion shines through every picture she takes. Whether creating a series of artistic shots, headshots, corporate shots, or capturing one of life's most memorable moments, she just can't be beat. Consider Sandy Wyndham Photography. Visit her now at sandywyndham.com and let her know you're a ZGR listener for special discounts.
Welcome back to Zeta Global Radio. We were just saying off air about how technology, you're beholden to it, and then at the same time, it's like I think I have a love-hate relationship going on with technology, and I'm sure I'm not the only one.
Sure.
Anyway, so we're going to move forward, and we were talking off air about where things are these days, and I think sort of the common theme that you're saying is about the attention span of people is so reduced now with the advent of all this technology. And here we have all this sophistication, yet we're still in sort of these rudimentary behaviors. And that's sort of where I think that plays with everything that we're doing. We have all this sophistication, but people are still fracking and doing things that are destroying life as we know it. So just wherever we go with that, let's just start there. I know you could probably say a million things, hours worth.
It's a very valid point. There is no panacea for it, but I refer to in the title of the piece that I've given for this record is from a man called R. Buckminster Fuller, and Buckminster Fuller was a very strange little man, a polymath who basically self-taught at quite a late stage in life after having all sorts of strange adventures. This is a man who could remember the first planes going over. This is a man who could remember the first motor cars. This is a man who could remember the first radio and television broadcasts.
Wow.
And who died in the 80s, I think it was. He invented all sorts of things, amazing car, a house that could be built in a day. And he's responsible for the whole idea of this concept of planet, the whole idea of the spaceship Earth, his idea that we can, in fact, do more with less. He's the originator of that phrase. And
which I use a lot. Less is more. I say that all the time.
Yeah. So his I don't know how much you know about boats, but on a big ship, you have a steering wheel. I think there's a special name for that thing, but the captain has this thing in his hands, and to turn a ship, obviously, that little wheel is not going to turn a very big ship. There's a rudder at the back. So how do you turn that ship? Well, there's another little rudder inside the big rudder, and the big wheel turns the little rudder, which then pushes the water in the opposite direction, which then pushes the big rudder. And this is called a trim tab. And this thing means that one person can move an entire huge ship that they normally wouldn't be able to. And he's actually, on his gravestone, it says, "Just call me Trim Tab." And the idea is that human beings have that possibility as well. So his life's mission was to find out what one individual could do in terms of making a difference in the world.
Wow, chills, powerful. It actually goes back to what you were saying before with Simply Superior about affecting change with one person, because there's so many spiritual leaders who say that, like affect one person and see the exponential effect it could have on the world.
Yeah, yeah. And this is a guide, he's one of the guiding lights, if you like, behind not everything. I mean, he wasn't right about everything, but nobody's right about absolutely everything. I think we have this tendency in the West that if somebody's wrong about one little thing, we throw everything out. We find out that some guru has been collecting Rolls Royces and therefore everything they say must be garbage. But I had to get rid of this idea. It's like a sports coach. I mean, you may have a sports coach who can't run and yet they can tell somebody else how to do it. You have to realize that someone can be an expert on something and they may have terrible body odor, but it doesn't make them a bad teacher. And the very fact that we can do this, it's a bit like the lever, the idea that you can take a piece of wood or metal or something and you stretch it out and you can move something yourself that normally you wouldn't be able to pick up. And this is really the use of technology. This is the conscious, proper use of technology, not to amuse yourself to death, as Neil Postman used to call it. It's in order to be able to affect these changes in the world. So a small group of, a small intelligent group of people is able to affect the change that an army would not be able to. And that's not an exaggeration, because if you look at history, you will see that it's not individuals who do it, but it's small intelligent groups of people who do this. If they're all pointing in the same way. It sounds
like you're describing Music Healed Earth. Yeah. In a way, small group of people, beautiful people like you and several others who said, yeah, I want to contribute to this and make change, because we need to, we don't use that word climate change. We don't use anything that has political angst. We use something called planetary mindfulness. It's like, wake the F up. We got to be a little more kinder to ourselves and in land that's letting us, rent it for a while, as long as, if we're lucky enough to rent it 100 years.
Right. I think also another dimension of this is when people have become emotionally involved in something. But unfortunately, and this is the real crux of the matter, is that it's very difficult to get people. So you have to do what I was saying before. You have to use a whole bunch of strategies in order to captivate people's attention for this. Because I'll give you an example. I don't watch the news or anything like that. I have to check the news once in a while because I have to find out what's happening with British passports, because I still have a British passport and the whole Brexit thing affects that. So there's the only reason I look at the news. But I saw something about that scientists hope that they have found some kind of organism which will actually eat plastic. Right? So what I thought was, this is the worst possible thing you could put on to let people know, because everybody's going to go, oh, well, they've solved the problem. I don't have to think about it anymore. Right? That's going to be, I would say, for the greater percentage of the people who read that, there's going to be an inner relaxing about this. It's not going to seem like an urgent problem anymore because, they've got it all sorted out. It's all taken care of now. And that is the danger of the plethora of information that we have, is that we think just by reading something, just by looking at something, we've got the answer to this thing. I've noticed that in the last 10 years, people do much less, but they talk a lot more. Yeah. And just by talking about it, they think they've done something, So this is the real danger, that we actually have this, that there is no action, that there is lots and lots and lots of talk and lots of people throwing their hands up in the air and getting all excited and all the rest of it, but actual action doesn't really happen. The example which I saw a film some years ago, and I've been telling people to watch this film as much as possible, because there was a sort of a mini version of this happened in Iceland when I was still living there. I lived in Iceland for about nearly 12 years. And what happened was, some years ago, is that an American company called Alcoa, that makes aluminium foil, the sort of stuff that you use in the kitchen or whatever, bought, sight unseen, underneath the radar of the Icelandic people, a large section of Iceland. And a major valley, the largest national park in Europe, was flooded to make a hydroelectric dam, because to make aluminium you need a large amount of electricity. So many plants, many animals were all destroyed, which don't only exist there. And basically the government actually sold a large part of the country to America. So this hydroelectric dam was built, and at that time I lived in Iceland, and the Icelanders didn't protest. It was only foreigners that protested, because the Icelanders thought they were going to get a lot of money. And it turned out that all the people who came to work there were Chinese and Portuguese people who were imported to do the work, and they ended up with nothing. So,
Wow.
So at that time, I saw this particular film, which I'm going to mention, which in English, the title is Czech Dream, which is a film made by two students. It was their final work in the Prague School of Film. And a big thing in Eastern Europe was the idea of the hypermarkets, this big, what you would call in America, a shopping mall. Mm-hmm. And this was a big thing. This was a big symbol of the end of the communist era. This was freedom to be able to buy what you wanted, to join in the capitalist game. And so what they did was they went to a professional stylist. They got trained on how to speak. They got suits. They got the whole thing. And they set up a mall, a hypermarket, and they had leaflets going through everybody's door in Prague. They had advertisements on every single bus shelter. They had on the radio, the television, this big hypermarket, and there actually was nothing there. So this was just before Czech Republic wanted to become part of Europe. So it was the whole idea was that it's just a smokescreen. It's just a facade, the whole thing. And so all these people looked at these leaflets and they saw all these products which were from the Soviet era, these pickles that you couldn't get anymore and all this. So everybody wanted, and thousands of people came to the opening of this hypermarket, and they erected this facade which looked as if it was a building, but it was only the front bit of it. And they all ran through this field to this opening of this hypermarket, and there was nothing behind the facade. And the reaction, the most interesting part of the film, the most interesting thing about the film is the reactions of the people after they realize that it's not there. I won't spoil it for you, but you should watch this and you should see exactly how this. So this kind of thing gets the attention of people, and it gives them a message in a completely different way than telling them. Because the thing is that I have realized is that people do not change by arguments. There is an emotional component which has to come first, and the thinking comes afterwards. For example, if you had, I don't know, let's say with sport, for example, I mean, do you think you could ever convince a sports fan to change their allegiance from one football team to another by an argument? No, of course not. Well, the same is true about things like climate change, about pollution, about all this other kind of stuff. Until there is an emotional component, nothing will change, because the mental bit is too easy to put aside and say, oh, I've thought about this, I've talked about this, I'm concerned about this, I'm done.
Well, and it goes back to what you said about the attention span, whether they've lived through a hurricane, which I have, lived through earthquakes, which I have, or or fires like they had recently in California. They are compassionate and they send prayers and they want to do something for about 5 minutes. And then they get back to their life. Right.
Or they put a thumbs up on Facebook, and suddenly cancer is cured.
Right. They're in agreement. We got to do something. Go ahead, somebody else.
Right. Exactly. So what I'm talking about is getting people into a situation by constructing these situations with the workshops that I do, by confusing people to the point where you can actually talk to them, because I hold the confusion can actually be a very useful tool to get past all of these preconceptions and concepts that people have in place, which are very difficult to get through. You go around the side.
Well, you mentioned workshops, so this is actually a good time to take a break. We're going to take a quick brief moment, and then let's talk about the workshops, and let's talk about what you're doing now and how people can learn more about that. So we'll be right back. You're listening to ZGR.
Spiritual Communities Network, where we honor the uniqueness in our oneness. Visit our website to meet our vast spiritual community of healers, therapists, conscious events, and activities. Visit and check out our directory, upcoming retreats, workshops, products, free videos, and much more. Many services are available globally by phone, Skype, and other sources of media. You'll also find more information on how you can be a member to promote the work you're doing in the world. Visit us now at spiritualcommunitiesnetwork.com.
Trice Massage Therapy and Skincare is Southwest Florida's premier holistic and wellness spa to relax and rejuvenate your well-being. Founded by Lucille Trice, this enlightened haven located in Cape Coral offers a variety of massage therapies including Swedish, deep tissue, and trigger point massage. Trice offers detoxifying body wraps and facials using natural organic ingredients to pamper your skin and restore balance and health. Visit their Trice Massage Therapy and Skincare Facebook page or call 239-672-0526 and book your experience today. Mention ZGR and receive a complimentary ionic foot detox experience.
So I'm not kidding when I say we need a lot of time with Andrew. We can talk volumes of topics and stories and learning. And you caught my ear when you started to say about the workshops that you're doing now. So that's what you're doing now? Let's talk about that.
Right. Well, this was a sort of a natural extension because, as I said before, I wanted to give these techniques, these things back to people, in the same way as a lot of people have been very generous to me, and it had made a huge difference to me. I felt that I had a way to actually do that. I had never attempted to do anything like this, but when I actually was offered the chance to do it, it just felt like a very natural thing. And all of these pieces started to slot together. Now, very little of it is original with me, some of it, but it's a synthesis of all the things that I've come. So it's a synthesis that nobody else has. It's a mixture that nobody else has. But I'm not claiming that it's 100% original. But there again, nobody is. So there are three. Nor does it have to be. Excuse me?
Nor does it have to be.
No, indeed not. Indeed not. It has three different forms. So there's a short version, which is 5 days workshop and then a 14-hour performance. You can do the performance, but you have to do the performance, you have to have had the techniques in the 5 days. You can do the 5 days, you don't have to do the performance, but to do the performance, you wouldn't be able to perform it unless you'd done the workshop. There's another version which is 9 days, and that involves the people actually living together for 9 days. So it's a 24-hour
immersion. Woo!
Yeah.
So exactly. This is for musicians?
It's for anybody.
It's for anybody. Okay.
It's for anybody. And actually a mixture of musicians and artists and accountants and whatever is actually fantastic, because then you can't have the same sort of preconceptions. If you're in a room with a bunch of musicians, you behave very differently to if there's a 72-year-old woman who paints landscapes of. Oh,
right. Yeah.
Down or whatever. So there's a 9-day version, and that involves a kitchen. The central metaphor is basically birth and death, because things die in the kitchen in order to give new life, and so on and so forth. So that's and then there's a 27-day version, which is 3 hours a day for 27 days. So to simplify it a bit, all three of them are all about one thing, and that's the development of an attitude. Not about a specific bunch of tricks or techniques or strategies, although those are in there, but the development of an attitude, rather than trying to plan for the future, which is absolutely impossible, to realize that, to accept that, and to develop an attitude that you can deal with a situation as it arises for what it is, and not what you think it should be, not what you've been told it should be, or what society or anybody else thinks it must be. So there is a willingness to actually engage with the moment as it really is, and not how you think it would be, or whatever. There's a wonderful definition of intelligence which I came across not so long ago, which is intelligence is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. So that attitude is that okay, fine, you don't know what's going to happen. You know that you can't predict what's going to happen, because in every event, we have this illusion created by the fact that we have Western languages are based on the idea of logic. At root, they have this idea in the Greek logic. So something can only be one thing and not another thing. It's either or, not both and, but either or. And in that sense, you have to have clear-cut everything. And A causes B. Mm-hmm. But there's an infinite number of causes that go into every single event. When did this conversation start? Did it start when we turned on this computer? Did it start when we made the arrangement over the internet? Did it start when your husband heard about me the first time? Did it start when you were born? Did it start when your parents were born? Did it start when they were, et cetera, et cetera? There is no one particular point where we make the distinctions. We make the distinctions between us and other things, right?
No, I was just going to say, I'm sure most of the people who listen to this show would say, or it could start from many, many lifetimes ago.
But even then, it's impossible to define. It's the example, the really good example is given by Gregory Bateson, and that's a blind man. A blind man with a stick taps in order to take in information from the environment and take it inside and make some sort of representation about how the world is. We use our eyes. Mm-hmm. So the person holding the stick, where does the stick begin and where does his hand end? Mm-hmm. Is it halfway down the stick? Is it at the tip of the stick? You can't say. It is no longer that. It's us that says that this thing is separate from this other thing. It's a bunch of changing relationships. Yeah. The same with us and the earth, the same with us and other people. It's us that makes the separations, and those aren't real. We forget that the metaphors that we use are only metaphors. They're useful to make these distinctions, but making those distinctions is ultimately, if you start to believe in them and identify with them, then you have a problem. So the attitude that there is an infinite number of causes for a situation and there will be an infinite number of unpredictable effects of that. Now, you and I have absolutely no idea who's going to be listening to this. We have no idea what the people who listen to this are going to do as a result of this. There's absolutely no way to predict any of this. There may be something.
I say that every week for 4 years. I have no idea. It could be one. It could be 100,000.
Right. So that it could be absolutely cataclysmic. I mean, it could be absolutely phenomenal. It could be nothing. We don't know this, and it's important to realize that it's like sending a child out into the world. I mean, you hope the best, and you try to send it out with the best possible equipment and resources and training or whatever you like, but you can't control it. You don't know what your child is going to meet on the road. You don't know. So you have to have a particular kind of courage, you might say, to embrace the fact that you don't know what's going to happen and to do it with the best motivation. That's all that you really can do. And to try and control these processes, which are infinitely complex, that is a fool's errand. I mean, it's what you can do, though, is you can show people that it is possible to have an attitude to deal with these things. And that involves conscience and that involves compassion, not the kind of compassion which is actually this sort of soft Walt Disney kind of stuff. We're talking about the stuff which can be very cold and very hard. Compassion can also be very diamond-edged.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a warm, fuzzy kind of, that's all right. No, I mean, if you have a child, for example, I mean, a lot of people have this idea that anger, for example, is a bad thing. But anger can be used just like anything else. If you have two children, for example.
But you can do compassionate anger?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, you can have, for example, let's say you have two children playing in another room, and you come in and you see one of the children about to drink rat poison. Do you go over to them and you say, I think you're going to make a bad life choice here? No! Of course. You shout and you scream and you show by the anger that you can turn it on. I mean, it will turn on because you will be angry, because you will be frightened.
Yeah.
And you know
so
that,
true.
So nature doesn't give us these things for nothing. They can be used. You don't get it's like when they used to say, the appendix, just take the appendix out. It doesn't put it there for nothing. And they've now discovered that, of course, it's very important for the immune system. It took them a long time to realize that. And the tonsils, for example, when I was a kid, if you ended up in hospital, they say, you're in the hospital anyway, let's take the tonsils out while you're here. And now we realize it has a very big effect on the endocrine system and, in that sense, the sexual functions. So all of this stuff, like all these emotions which are supposedly negative and useless, and we should get rid of them or suppress them or deal with them in another way. No, if you're conscious, you can use them. If you know how to use them, it's not the fault of the person, of the brick of the person who makes a brick. Somebody can smash somebody on the head with it or build a house. I mean, it's not the fault of the person who made the brick. So, carry on.
No, I was just going to say, so tying this back in, is this what happens in the workshop? All these sort of revelations and experiences? Just to tie
that and these and many, many, many more. Wow. So there's even in the 5-day thing, there's an immense amount goes into this. And it's basically the product of, almost 40 years of dealing with this kind of stuff, pulling these things in. And of course, taking into account the people who are actually there, because some people don't respond to certain things. I have to frame things in certain ways for certain people. And I've learned how to do that. And some people, as we said before, some people need to be seduced, some people need to be threatened, some people need a carrot, some people need a stick, and all the shades in between that. And it's a little bit like, people don't do it very much anymore, but I mean, if you went to a tailor and you went to buy a suit, well, yes, you can buy it off the rack, but a good tailor will actually alter it so it fits you, probably. And that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm not really, I mean, the suit is there and you can take it from other places, but it won't fit you very well. It might be okay, but the chances of it fitting you perfectly are not that good. It'll be okay. You'll put up with it. But if you have that extra bit of attention and it's been tailored, it's been given to you in a language using metaphors that you understand and that you know, you will learn it because it will become real to you. I'm not teaching anybody anything. What I'm doing is the old thing of showing people what they don't know that they already know.
Do you find that when these groups come together that there's common themes? Because I am always a believer that when people get together, they're all there in that unique divine appointment, that divine alignment. There's something that they're all going to learn from each other, or they all are going through something similarly. Or do you find
if they allow themselves to see that, yes. But of course, as I said before, with some people, it takes quite a long time to get rid of all of these preconceptions and to empty out a lot of stuff before something new can go in.
Old programming, yeah.
I mean, I'm going to do it this year again, but I mean, a few years ago, I went to a place in the very south of Latvia, right on the Russian border, a place called Daugavpils. And I gave a week-long course for women who were English teachers. They were Latvians, Russian Latvians, who actually taught English. They had nothing to do with art, nothing to do with music, nothing at all. And it was amazing. It was absolutely wonderful. In the 5 days, we got more done than you would get in, a month of Sundays with a bunch of artists. Really. Huh.
Well, you were saying at the end of the workshop, there's a concert. Is that right?
Indeed. So the workshop is an excuse for the performance, and the performance is an excuse for the workshop. It's a way to utilize all of the techniques and all the things that have been gone through, so that you see what they are like in a practical level. Because most workshops have this sort of 72-hour high thing, and people go to these things and they come away, oh, that's wonderful, wonderful, and then 2 weeks later it's like, what was that? What did we do? It doesn't stick.
Yeah, they don't know how to integrate it in real life.
Exactly. And this is why there is this integration, which is in the form of a very intense, 14 hours is a very long time, performance, and not much happens. So it's that's why I do it the way I do it. And of course, it means that you're able to put it into a public setting. I'm able to use the past work to get people interested. It's not coming out of the blue, although in some cases that's a handicap because that involves a whole bunch of other preconceptions. It's done in order to be practical. It's not done to be more brain entertainment. That's the last thing anybody needs.
So if there are any incredibly enlightened beings who feel called to these workshops, who are listening to this show right now, how would they reach you? What's the best way to contact you to learn more about it?
There is a website, which is all one word, simplysuperior.org.
Okay.
That's the first port of call, basically. The information there is necessarily a bit opaque because it's not possible to actually put it into bite-sized pieces and nice little headlines and all the rest of it. there is a certain element, I won't deny it, that people have got to do some work before they actually get to this. It's not something which is to be done passively. It's not something which is actually, I would say, quote unquote, easy. The reason for that is that it's not the same as these other things. And there is a conscious attempt to make it, to put it into the right ballpark before people even get into it. So if people can't fight their way past this seemingly obscure thing, then it's unlikely that they're going to be open enough and willing to do the work, because, as I say, it's a workshop. It's like a shop where you can buy stuff and you pay for the stuff that you're going to get by doing work. So it's not some kind of like you pay your entrance and it's like you're fed like some sort of baby bird.
Right.
It's not like that.
Got it. I can't imagine that would be part of your realm. I think your platform is to really ignite somebody and to bring out the best in them of what they already know that they have. They're just need to like almost be reactivating their own toolbox.
Well, in many cases, it's because they don't even trust themselves to be able to do these things.
Yeah.
For example, I mean, one of the first things that I do in all the workshops is memory. And I say, who's got a good memory? And nobody puts their hand up. So I show people that they do have a good memory. It's just that they were never shown how to use it. Don't you think it's ironic that in the Western education system, it's all predicated on the idea that you've got to remember a whole bunch of stuff, but you're not told how to remember?
Good point.
It's amazing and insane.
Yeah, so true. And the stuff they're told to remember, how much of it is valid, and B, how much of it is really going to be used in real life? Right.
Yeah. So a lot of it is fundamentals, but these fundamentals are not looked at. It's as if it's the whole theory of obscurity. I mean, if something is obvious, you don't notice it. It's like pickpockets, who steal right in front of you, and you don't notice it because you don't even think that this can't possibly be happening. So you edit it out of your existence, like a magic trick. This can't possibly be happening, and yet if you were to watch it slowed down on a video monitor, you would see, oh, how did they not see this? Well, that's exactly how it is with people's attention, is because they're not used to actually looking at things objectively. It's all subjective and identified with it. And this is when we talk about anything to do with fixing problems like global warming and all this other kind of stuff, you have to move beyond the idea of just thinking, as far as I'm concerned, move beyond the idea of just thinking about it and having some kind of connection with it, which is not just a surface connection. And that is the real task. And it's not that simple. It's not enough to just draw people's attention to something, because, as we said before, as soon as they think that somebody else is doing something about it, there's a certain part of them relaxes and they think, oh, well, somebody else is taking care of it.
Beautiful.
And that's the real thing. It starts, think global, act local.
Yeah, it's true.
And that consciousness is actually something which it's possible to foster in people, but you can't do it direct on anymore. You used to be able to. You can't do it directly on anymore because it just becomes invisible. And that's one of the central points, is about making it so that individual conscience is awakened in people. It's dormant. It's not dead. It's dormant. Because it's I
always say unlocking the library. That's my term.
It's a good one. Yeah, exactly. It's a good one.
So we're out of time, and I realize that we should really do a part 2 and 3 at some point. And I myself am very interested in this workshop. So we'll talk more about that, and any information that you have further besides going to your website, I'd love to impart to the audience as well. So I'm thanking you very much for being here. I know this was just the tip, but I'm grateful we had this time together. And I'm grateful you're part of the M2 Heal family. And of course, M2 Heal does want to go to, one of the intentions is to go to Iceland and share an awareness concert, as we call them, over that way. So a lot more to be revealed.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. And hopefully even one person's interest will be piqued enough to do something. So
absolutely. Understand the line. I just want to thank everybody for listening in today. I know it was equally a treat for you as it was for me. This show will replay in a varied on iTunes, on SoundCloud, of course, on ZetaGlobalRadio.com, in social media. There's nowhere you can't find this, and of course, we have our YouTube station. So please share it far and wide. We greatly appreciate you being here. Have a blessed week.